Hello, friends. Welcome to Minority Trip Report. MTR is a podcast for underrepresented views and life journeys with mental health, psychedelics, and consciousness. I'm your host, Raj Suraj. Today, my guest is Kowsheek Mahmood. Kowsheek is a software engineer by trade, currently working at Adobe Substance 3D and Immersive Labs. Kowsheek joined Adobe through his acquisition of BRIO, where he was the head of technology for the web-based 3D presentation platform. Prior to this, Kowsheek served as Chief Technology Officer for several companies in the FinTech, transportation, and marketing automation spaces. In the ongoing pursuit of drive and fulfillment, personally and for his teams, Kowsheek explores various cultural, healing, meditative, and ancient practices. Kowsheek, a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, man. I want to start off by saying the amazing work you're doing and how inspiring it's been for me as a Bengali, as a technologist, as a maker. I think it's incredible the way you're able to articulate what we're up to as a people, Bengali people, but as also minorities. And so, yeah, we can get into it. But the amount of experiences I've unraveled just by hanging out with you in the short amount of time that we met has been very profound for me. So I'm super amped to do this with you right now.
I really appreciate that, man. That means a lot to me. We're going to talk a little about technology, but you and I connected on Twitter. And this is one of the beautiful things about technology and its positive impacts on the world. Of course, there's lots of things that is questionable and is still unraveling, but I think this is the thing that it was designed for, to connect people of like minds who've never met, and all of a sudden a spontaneous moment brings them together. And look where we are now. We're good friends, building things together, and now you're on my podcast.
I totally agree with you on that. But I would say, even with that, it's only the human kind of initiative that makes that happen. Because you and I both follow thousands of people. I've never messaged a Bengali person. I've never connected with them. I don't think I've ever even connected with a random person like that I didn't already know from, as they call it, IRL. So I think it more speaks to about the initiative that you took than from provides. Because I feel like if we were elsewhere, we would still connect in some way. And
Mm.
that's from the initiative that humans bring to the table. So anyway, that's
Well,
why,
no, I definitely believe in the hippie ethos that if it's meant to be, it will happen. The universe, as hokey as it sounds, does find a way to conspire and bring like-minded people
absolutely.
together. I want to start in the very beginning. I often sort of bring on guests and we talk about really how did they grow up. My belief is that I don't believe in fate per se, but I do believe that if you explore enough dimensions, you eventually come to the thing you're supposed to do. And I think upbringing has a lot to do with that. So I think you've grown up in so many different places. Just the other day, I found that you went to the oldest market in the world in Damascus because your dad was a diplomat posted in Syria. Back when Syria was not a conflict-ridden zone, it's still such a sad thing that one of the oldest civilizations in human history has come to this. But let's start now. How you grew up. What was the circumstances? Your father was a diplomat, meant that you traveled and moved quite a lot. How did that sort of shape you?
I think, like most of us, I think childhood is very defining, right? And it's defined both the good things and the bad things in my life in terms of how I deal with stress, trauma, all those things, but also the hunger for learning and exploring and curiosity and the need for diversity in my life. I think both of those things come from my upbringing. As you mentioned, I moved around a lot, so that obviously puts a strain on a child on not having friendships, not having long-lasting relationship, having parents, and as most immigrant people know, having parents who have really high expectations of you, despite the upheavals of traveling and moving around. So I think that was very defining for me. Yeah, we moved, even though I was born in Bangladesh, I moved to Jordan like really early on. That's where my first memories are. I have some memories of Bangladesh and Sylhet. That's where my dad used to work. I have some memories of Bangladesh, but most of my memories are from the Middle East. And like you said, I had the privilege of visiting many of the ancient parts of world civilization, not just ours. We went and visited Babylon. We went and visited Damascus. And that's actually why I think I have that pull towards ancient knowledge, because you see the archaeology, the history that defines all of us, because the history of Babylon is not just the history of Persian people or Iranian people or Iraqi people. It's the history of Alexander. It's the history of Greece and all of civilization. So it's something recent, actually. I've come to that, our history is all intertwined. But anyway, back to the topic of upbringing. Yeah, so I grew up in the Middle East a lot with going to international schools, learning different languages. As always, like I don't know what it is. Actually, immigrant people, when we go to the Middle East or other countries, like education is much easier for us. I don't know what it is. It's like higher expectations from your family or whatever it is. So I excelled in my studies, but I think it was never good enough. So I was always a bookworm. I was reading a lot of things. I was always inquisitive about knowledge. And my dad, he's very cultured. He's got, as most of our parents from Bangladesh, hundreds of poems memorized, and we would always listen to them. He'd recite them to us. Our upbringing was very, at least mine was very connected to culture, arts. But once again, the flip side of that is expectation and the need to be more and need to grow. Yeah, most of my childhood was in the Middle East and in Bangladesh. That's where we mostly moved around. Lots of country I've got to visit. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how your father became a diplomat, because Bangladesh itself is a very young country.
Right.
So for him to become a diplomat and represent Bangladesh, I imagine at that time, probably in countries where there was no diplomatic relations or a brand new relationship was
Yeah.
established. And so he might be the only in that country. You mentioned
Yeah,
that he was
totally.
working with people who didn't have any other way to get passports and stuff.
Oh, totally. If my memory serves me correctly, so my dad and the whole mission that he was partaking in was the first mission to Jordan. So to establish an embassy there. And
What
it's
year
like
was it?
imagine like back in this is I would want to say 1994 or 1993, something like that. So quite a
Mhm.
while ago. Once again, my memory may be fuzzier on those numbers. But yeah, he was one of the he was what's called first secretary, and basically he worked for the government all his life in Bangladesh. And as we were trying to build relationships with the Middle East, because as you know, a lot of foreign workers, Jordan, beacon of democracy and stability in the Middle East, and having an embassy there, I think strategically made a lot of sense for Bangladesh actually, and that's what did. And from the base in Jordan, we would visit places like Iraq, places like Iran, to support people who are working there or renew their passports, help them with their immigration issues or human rights issues. My dad, he's been very professional throughout his life, and he's been excelling in his life through that professional career as an administrator for the government. Yeah, I think it's amazing to see how our country slowly evolves through a personal story of my dad and mine. So yeah, and in those countries there is a lot of respect for people who come from our background, even though you hear on the media a lot of other stories, but people see the hard work and how we're helping them build those countries. But obviously, there's a flip side to that too. There's a lot of human rights issues. So, yeah, I think those things really defined my upbringing. Like, I always endeavor to be diplomatic with people, even though
Mm.
I can be not so much as well.
I've never known
But
you to be diplomatic. You
sometimes. I
speak.
think that's part of the story as well. I think that's one thing I've noticed my dad as well to do is speak his mind and be very truthful to how he believes in and the culture that he represents. So you are always defined by your parents, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And I think these are good values that I carry forward and try to nurture for sure.
It's funny because I believe that your dad probably was posted in Saudi Arabia at the same time that I was growing up, be the mid
Oh,
'90s, which is be that I wasn't in your house. And then
hey, I do try to keep my professional life separate from my personal life, but need to go chat with my dad about where your dad was and where your family was at the time. Because in 1998, we moved full time, or 1999, we moved full time to the Middle East. Like I remember Saudi Arabia, sorry, and I remember in 2001 being in our living room on 9/11 in Saudi Arabia, and I think I was alone watching that news, and then I called my dad, like check out what's happening. It was like late night too. So I remember that very vividly. So if you were there at the time, I'm sure you interfaced with the embassy. My dad was stationed there. So yeah, it's funny how the
yeah,
world
wow.
works. Like
It is funny, and nobody ever forgets where they were when 9/11 happened. It's such a
I know it's such a
surreal.
defining moment in culture and history. I was actually thinking about this, like what is another moment in history that our generation remembers? And I think it would be COVID. That would be the next
Right.
thing that we
Yeah.
remember.
COVID was the great equalizer in the sense that I think across generation, this has become 3 years that we all share, maybe different perspective on it. Depends on where
That's
you
right.
live, and even if you're downtown or out on the outskirts of the city, different experience. But where I was getting with that is, I think to glamorize the life of a diplomat because you get to travel a lot. You are at these swanky parties and you're like helping people or doing this, what feels on the surface like a glamorous life. But I can imagine being children of diplomats is very hard because you were alluding to this a little. You move around a lot. You don't have time to build deep relationships and have embedded relationships anywhere you go. It's a little bit about what that was like. You were really into reading books and culture and really about acquiring knowledge, but where did that motivation come from and how much was that related to having to move around?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure if I can connect all those dots, but I think I maybe just intrinsically was always drawn to words and like text. I think that's always something I've noticed I have an affinity for, just words and letters. And so I was really into books. So I'm not sure what it is. And that's why I'm also a great programmer. I think
Mhm.
it like those things just work for my brain. But when it comes to move, it's the same for athletes. Athletes, I know their lives are glamorized and there's all this like money about their lives. But really, if you think about it, like every week they're in a new city, they're having to maintain their schedule. So it's very, from the outside, what may look glamorous, it's very different for the when you're in the family. There's a thing for the military. Actually, the military may look glamorous slash very like insular, but the thing is, there's a reason for that because everyone is like mobile. They're moving around. Their unit is very small. I think that's what happened to me as a kid. Is that my unit became very small, which I was just myself, right? So I like to be very individual and maybe fiercely so, which served me well at some points and others not so much. So yeah, I think to your point, it's just not always the case that it's glamorous because my mom used to say by the time I was 20, we have moved around 21 times. So on average, I lived in a house 1 year. And Toronto is where I moved eventually, and that's the longest I've been in one city forever in 30 plus years that I've been alive. So, yeah, so you don't really like you ask me where's your childhood home, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Like I'd be like, I don't know. I had so many of them that I have fragmentations of memory. There's how people say I want to go back to my childhood X like place. I wouldn't be able to tell you what that is. And before actually I used to feel sad about that. I was like, oh man, I don't have a thing like that. But more recently I've come to terms with that and actually embrace that my home is everywhere. Like I go, right? I have places in Jordan I can go to, in Saudi Arabia, and Tehran. Pretty awesome. Coming to terms with that as a kid is impossible. You just like close in, you do your thing as an individual. It's the story of most people who go through that kind of experience. Yeah.
Third culture kids are a special breed. Home is always an elusive idea, but I think
Right.
similar to you, I've also found peace in it and actually strength in it now, but there's a lot of personal anguish.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What culture, what in group to be a part of, whether I was constantly doubting if I was ever going to be part of any in group. But I think, to your point, when you make peace with that, you can actually, home is really easier than it sounds wherever you want it to be. It
It's
is a,
everywhere. This is the whole planet is your home, and any culture can be your home, and that's what I've also experienced. And Arab people and like Middle Eastern people, I think, because of Bedouin culture and all that, they kind of embrace that you are always welcome to their tribe. And I think that very informed slash wise approach because, you have to move cities as a Bedouin, you had to, not so much anymore. Like there's no inkling of Bedouin culture in Dubai or these places anymore, but it's definitely ingrained in even Eastern culture. Our culture is that you're always welcome as a family to someone else's family. Kids live multi-generationally and all those things. Those are things I think we've lost a little bit. But yeah, the world can be your home wherever you want it to be. And it's really about the mindset of, hey, I'm going to make a home here. These are the people I'll be with. Because your point, like about the in group, like I said, I've been very individualistic, but I think about, oh, I got to go hang out with my childhood friends. I don't know what that means. Like, where are they? No idea where most of my friends are. Even funny thing how life works is two of my best friends from both Jordan and Saudi Arabia live in Toronto,
oh,
and I've had been able to be in touch with them. But obviously, like we're not best friends anymore. But
oh.
it's like, and that's when I was in like I don't know grade 4 and like grade 7 or 8, something like that. It's like I was really young to have those best friends and see their lives evolve now. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. Like last year, so I was in Paris with two of my best friends from here that I met. They're both Bangladeshi and we met in university and we did our first trip abroad together. So we went to Paris and then Amsterdam. And in Paris, enough, it wasn't planned. It just happened in such a way that I had this one dinner where my friends from like growing up in Saudi, they came from the UK and other part of France to meet us there. So it happened that my friends from 30 years ago were with my friends from 20 years ago, joining friends from 10 years ago, and then friends that I met 5 years. And I was thinking that every one of those groups had different fragments of myself, and it was just hilarious to see them all together. They all got along, and I'm like, oh, maybe there has been a common thread. No matter where in the world I went, I hung out with the same kind of people. Switch gears. I want to talk about your knack for technology. So, in this sort of phase of your life where you're learning and this constant hunger for learning, where did the technology come in? Where did the role of, let's say, computers and software, where did that start? How did that start?
I don't think I've been away from computers for a very long time. So it's gonna take me a while to describe all of that. But I think it started with video games. Like I was always playing video games since I remember maybe like I think the first time I had a computer was like 1998 or something like that when no maybe 1996 when my dad bought us a Pentium 2. I remember that. Windows 98. Getting into the games, but what you may think I was just playing games, but not really. I was actually looking at how the game's folders were and like what files were in those folders, looking at like different textures and just examining like TIFF files and these text files for configuration. Just because I was like intrigued how these games are being made and what's behind them and how you could delete one file and it just doesn't work anymore. It was just cool. Like, it was just experimentation. I didn't really get into programming till I was like I think 14 or 15 when I came across the Sun Microsystems website where they had like 3 lessons on how to learn Java. And to what I said before about like text, it was just describing text and like how you could use text to make computers do things. And I was just very fascinated about that. And like I said, there wasn't like logical thinking about, hey, I'm going to get into this in a good career or whatever. But it was just something that I came across on the internet and was drawn to. And I did those lessons, the Java lessons. It was cool. And I think that started me in the journey of like programming. And then I met some random friend and I couldn't tell you which friend it was because I don't remember who it was, but we were, and we just happened to build some software for key logging, which was like, can you type keys and it actually logs what you're typing? Not very secure, not something I would build anymore. And then we built it and then we showed it around to our friends and someone was like, hey, I showed it to the cafe next door, like the internet cafe, and the guy wants to buy it from you. So I think around 16, I made my first money selling software, even though it's not software I'm very proud of, but it's still, I think
Hey,
it
man,
started
you
me,
hustle.
wasn't intentional. You could call it a hustle, but it's just, I guess, just the world pushing you in the right direction or in direction that you should go on. I guess. Yeah, that's how I sold my first software. That's where I wrote my first software that was something people used. And I think then I just love that craft of writing software and these things. And other books I started to read around like clean code and like elegance in programming. I think that's another concept that really pulled me was like, how do you have elegance in writing code? I know it's a very foreign concept for a lot of people, but there are such things as elegant programming and elegant code and you can write it and you can create it. And when you do it, it looks like a masterpiece, it feels like a masterpiece. There's the reverse of it, spaghetti code, like that. A lot of people write too. But I think that endeavor is what drives me still, like just building greater products, seeing better code, better architecture. It's like how I compare it is like chiseling away at a stone to make something beautiful. But what that does is not physical, it's a mental of refining something. I think, I find really attractive, and that's what drives me a lot. Yeah, like, I'll
It's the
spend
part
hours
where
just
the
yeah.
where skill turns to art, basically.
Yeah, it's craftsmanship. I think that's what I really love about what I do is the craftsmanship of learning something new and getting deeper into it and refining what you're building. Not just yourself. I know before I was very individualistic about it, but with a team, how do you help your team refine software with you so that they have the same level of either expectation or standards the same way I do, and maybe even more. So sometimes feed off of their standards too, of course. And how do you learn that and build that? So it's building mastery over work and
Mhm.
code. And that can be as simple as writing one line of code, right? It can be as complex as writing a full system. So I think all of that just is very, I think it tunes to, I think a common thread that everyone has, which is to find mastery in something. So artists have the same feelings, have the same feeling. So I think software artists, if you want to call us that, have the same draw as well. But it takes a journey to find that. It takes a journey to realize that there's something you can do. Yeah.
I think you're touching on a very philosophical aspect of technology. I think there's a lot of hype around technology nowadays and has been for the last however many years, partly because SaaS and software as a service and these multi-billion dollar companies, they're not that old. It's a maybe 10 to 15-year-old movement in a way. So I think
Yeah.
the reason I say that is there's a lot of hype and there's like an entire segment of the ecosystem that is just pushing hype. The result of that is that people have a completely wrong understanding what technology actually fundamentally or philosophically is. So let us step back a little bit and define what technology means to you and be as abstract and philosophical as you want. Let's step back and move away from software and hardware per se and talk about what it does and what it is.
And this is another part of, I guess, why I love technology. It's about, I think how I can answer this question is actually by referencing someone who inspires me to build technology, and not because of the technology for its sake. So it's Dave, my current boss, and I've also been working with him at BRIO for a long time. From his perspective, he's a creator by trade, one of the world's greatest modelers and 3D modelers and artists. And just to see him work and think about how he uses technology to solve a problem is something that always I do not find. I'm never bored of seeing that process that he goes through to create something with a technology solution. To me, it's about not just using technology for technology's sake, even though I did say that I could write code that I just love for writing code. It's like creating a painting for the sake of creating a painting that you never sell, you never show to anyone, right? And that's a process that many artists do, like my wife does. For me now, and especially working with Dave, what we see is like, how can we use technology to make lives better for artists? Because that's the work we do. And that's also why I love working at Adobe, because you said that some companies are like, what, 5 years old, but Adobe is 4 years old and they're still at it. They're still building technology to solve the creator's day to day problem. And I think that is really the point of it. And if you go backwards into history, like, technology was always used to solve problems, right? So the measuring stick to like technology, like it's always there to solve a problem. And technology can be anything, right? So it could be software, it could be a shovel, right? So all of those things have been technologies. It's just today it's software. And I actually think that it's not enough that it's software. And, Peter Thiel talks about this a lot about how can we go from the world of bits into the world of
Adams.
atoms, right? And we need to make that transition. But as it stands today, like the work I'm doing is about, okay, how do we make creators' lives easier, giving them better tools? And like what I said about Dave, like his process for using technology to solve that creative problem is really interesting and something to like unravel for me. That's something I'm still trying to learn from him. Yeah, I think that is really it. It's like, how do you solve a problem? And if you use something to solve a problem, that is a technology slash a tool, if you want to call it that
I heard one philosophical definition of technology being just an amplifier of intent.
thing.
And I think the point that you also made is that technology does not have any moral direction, right? It really depends on the
Yeah.
problem and the intention. The question is whose problem and whose intention. So it is an amplifier in the sense that whatever you want to do, it allows you to do it. Force multiplier, right? In that sense.
Right. Especially now, technology, because inflationary, so everything costs less and less. Technology
Oh,
just gets better and better and things cost less and less. And now it's at scale. So that's what's happening on Twitter, Facebook, whatever you name it. Like they're just because of sheer number of people who are on the internet, and the internet itself is a great example of that, right? So it started to be very expensive and then became like almost a human right now be
oh.
to have access to internet. So that means that at some point in time, the whole world will be on the internet. So every person will be on the internet. So then what's the difference between the world and the internet? So I think at some point there will be that explosion, and that's already happening. There's that explosion of like you make on the internet is like millions and millions of people are using, right? So an amazing time to be there. I guess we're lucky about you said we talked about the 11 thing, but we're also that generation that's lucky to not have had computers, but now have computers and have some of the best computers ever. And it seems like computers are not going to get much better. So I think we made it.
We're also maybe the rare generation that remembers what it was like to not have them. I did not have internet till like maybe 99 or something. Speaking about technology that helps society and helps people, let's talk about psychedelics. We've talked, in fact, what I love, and I think how I believe we actually bonded immediately is that the first call we had after DMG on Twitter, we immediately drove into cultural trauma and history and legacy and where we come from. And then we talked about psychedelics and we bonded over our shared experience with psychedelics. Tell me about your most meaningful psychedelic experience and what it did for you, or to you, rather.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what it was. It 4 or 2? I'm not sure. I know I would just borrow a sentence from Tagore, who's a writer and a brilliant artist on his own right. Says that some like a
He's
thought that
the national poet of right? For
of
all of
Bangladesh, yes,
Bengal.
yeah, one of the first Nobel laureates of that side of the world, if not the first. He says that
A case in point before
yeah,
you get to that, the first Nobel laureate in literature was Rabindranath Tagore from Bengal and Bangladesh, and not Bob Dylan. Although I like Bob Dylan a lot. People say first one. I'm like, no, there was a brown dude.
absolutely.
Anyway,
Just
sorry,
that's
go
an
on.
example of how the erasure of our culture, to some extent, actually, how we're slowly being forgotten, and we'll talk about that more, I'm hoping. So one of the things he said, which I love about that approach, and what I think the experience of psychedelics did for me, was that all of this like trauma and like that I had, for me, that experience of psychedelics or psychedelic experience made it clear, like a thought that becomes clearer as you read poetry. And that is the line I'm borrowing from Tagore. And that's what I think I carried with me for almost 15 years now. That clarity of like what I want to do with my life in terms of my ambition and what I'm leaving behind in terms of the burdens and the trauma. Obviously, you can't leave that behind. And that's something I had to address through like being in a relationship with my wife, who's challenged me a lot to evolve my worldview, thinking deeper about the assumptions that I made about my culture and my background. But that experience was seminal for me about clarifying where I want to go and how I want to get there. And my experience was amazing because I got to do it with some friends at Cherry Beach in Toronto. And what's
Oh,
awesome about Cherry Beach is that it has a very different perspective of Toronto, where I grew up, but where I fully developed my adult personality. But when you go to that side of Toronto and Cherry Beach, you look to Toronto from its southmost side, which you don't see typically because everyone lives on the north of Toronto. So I think that change of perspective, the water and how it becomes clear when you're on that trip, I think was something that's vivid. There's a mix of experience and clarity of thought that I found super powerful. I've always gone back to when I've felt misdirected or confused about what I'm doing. And it really takes me, I don't even have to do those experiences anymore. It's just takes me a moment to think back to the experience and it like I can snap back to what the purpose is for me. And of course, like that all evolves over time, but I think it was a very clarifying experience. And I think that's what's really valuable about it. Cause I think what's valuable about it is I think if you give people clarity, it's very easy to take the next step. So that's been invaluable for me. And I think that without that experience, I think I would be much more confused and like bumbling through life. At least that's my assumption. Yeah. So it's been a defining moment for me. And I'm just imagining it right now. And it's very profound to me.
to those listening, Cherry Beach is a really special part of Toronto because it's built on, I think it's basically reclaimed land, southeast part of Toronto, which is used to be industrial port areas. It was then derelict and abandoned for a while, and as part of the Portland really extends into the water as reclaimed land. And now it's like a natural bird reserve, and people go there to bike. Extends into the water, and so from that perspective, you can see the high rises in all of Toronto from deep in the water. It's a very special vantage. And that's what Kowsheek was referring to. You said two
Yeah.
things that I just want to hear a little bit more about. One is made your ambition more clear and then changed your or your wife helped you see the world different? How did you see the world before?
Oh, that's a great, great question. I think I saw it very doggedly focused on that ambition that I wanted to excel. I wanted to amplify my potential. And that meant just what tangibly that meant is 20-hour days and like just coding all the time and being reckless with relationships and myself, a human, right? As a being. And just as they would say in startup culture, hustling, right? And to be fair, that was a very good defining moment for me because we got to build so many different startups, so many different ideas, deep technology that today I'm reaping the benefits of because I can go into different vectors of technology very fluidly, given that I spent a long time building different products, exploring different technologies, exploring different programming languages. So it gives me that versatility that's, I think, beneficial to me today. But of course, it came as a cost of relationships and personal well being. And probably if I had sustained, you cannot sustain that. And if I had tried to 10 years, 20 years, now 15 years, it would just have been, and it would not sustain further along. And Gabor Mate, who's been also a great mentor, who doesn't know about me, he would say that people who live in that cycle of like hyper ambition eventually become sick and go through different kinds of stress related illness, which I'm glad I'm going to be avoiding, hopefully. But it's a struggle, of course, because it's very easy to fall back, at least for me, to snap back into that hyper ambitious slash focused work and not find that balance. Once again, I'm super thankful to my wife for keeping me in check with that about, hey, there's more to life than just the elegance of programming and the obsession
Oh,
of building, right?
yeah, I could definitely relate to that. Right. There's the productive part of your life, the productivity I'm sort of defining in that pure economics of the whole thing, mission, career, material things, money, and all this stuff. But there's the other productive side of life that I think the richness of relationships and being present
Right.
in the experience and stuff like that. How much of that has changed for you since that experience and as it reverberates to your life now? How do you see the world now? Clearly, the ambition is still there. That hasn't gone away. Since I met you, I know you to be very strong and ambitious, but what part has changed?
Yeah, I think it's something I'm constantly and evolving. I'll give you an example, I guess, to illustrate what the evolution has been. Or as a manager and leading teams, I would be very ruthless about how we led our teams, very metrics driven, very hierarchically like sound and trying to be very optimal with time. And these are the terms that I would always use. Like, are we optimizing for time? Are we optimizing for efficiency? If someone isn't, they get cut, they get removed from the team. It's very, very ruthless. In certain businesses that made sense, but I think I've never really bonded with my team of developers, of coworkers, of executives, right? It's been very results oriented, but working with Dave, working with my current team, who were my team at BRIO and now my team at Adobe, and really going on the personal journey with everyone and including myself and really understanding each person, their background. And once again, like the learnings from Gabor Mate, spending a lot of time, I spent a lot of hours just learning all the work that Gabor Mate put out and what he talks about stress, trauma, and childhood trauma, like how I could translate that and apply to my team to see like what is it that they're going through, what is it that I can help them with those things, even though I'm not getting into their personal problems. I'm just observing from the outside what is it that could be happening behind the scenes that I could help with. And I tell you, like it's really changed how I see my team and how I manage my team and how much I'm able to handle as a person of things that they may be going through, which I'm pretty sure in the past I would not be able to. I would just be like, okay, well, this is too stressful for you. This is not going to work. Let's move on. Whereas now we're working to evolve each other, and I find that much more fulfilling. And I think that there's a profound sense of like meaning in that, right? Whereas, yes, I'm not maybe churning out code, but we're still building great stuff together. And that includes building relationships, building our personal evolution. I think those things are important as well because there's just that many people you're going to interface with, right? It's important you have that impact with them. And those are the things I think I realized with my relationship with my wife and with Dave. These are things that are more meaningful to me that I build a relationship with them rather than just be like, oh, did that startup? I'm out of here. I think that depth is, I think, really been finding much more rewarding.
Beautiful. I have one more question related to this line of thinking or talking about psychedelics, I guess. I told you I'd come back to this last line of your bio, which is Kowsheek explores various cultural, healing, meditative action practices. So let's bring everything that you've said so far about where you grew up, your thirst for knowledge and history, and your experience with psychedelics, and becoming what sounds like better, kinder, a more fun person to be with. And I said, as a high functioning, semi irritating person too, what does this mean? Various cultural, healing, meditative, and ancient practices.
Yeah, I think one of my other mentors, and this is the thing I think, in our culture we've lost a little bit as Bengali people, is we don't have mentors that can give us that background. As I was rebuilding my personality, living in Toronto as a solo student, I spent a lot of time watching videos of Les Brown, Jim Rohn, I forget his name, but these people were like, inspirational speakers from the, but the other people who had a big impact in my thinking and my approach to things is Christopher Hitchens, who is a contrarian by trade and nature and personality and all of that. And one of the things he would say is people misunderstand contrarians, and including myself, is that contrarians are by nature looking and always hungrily operating on that margin of potentially great knowledge, discovery, wisdom, and a quote from him. And I think that's what I've always had, is like that hunger to learn and understand. And also when I was younger, my my dad gave us access to read things like the Bible, the Vedas, the Quran, like all these, ancient texts. And all of them have wisdom, right? None of them were like boring book to read. They all had stories, they all had history and culture to share with you. So that's where I think learning still continues for me today. Learning a lot from Buddhism and the native practices of North America about how you can still heal from trauma, how you can still find meaning in your struggle. And those things, it's almost like an endless endeavor to learn these things. But I think every time I learn something new that comes from one of these cultures has such deep impact because it's pervasive across all parts of our culture and all parts of our personal lives. To give you an example, if you learn about Ayurvedic approaches to sleep, right? How you could have different kinds of sleep. Now there's modern interpretations of that all the high functioning CEOs of the world and all of us do like non-sleep deep relaxation, which comes from Ayurvedic practice of certain kind of meditation. So it's a very, very ancient knowledge. And the ancient people were not stupid. They were like us, our brains did not evolve over like under 200 years. They evolved over millions of years. That knowledge and that functioning that we have, they also had. We just have to look to learn what they already knew or discovered. There's now coming out about different parts of the subsystems of the body that people are finding align with the meridian lines of acupuncture kind of tradition. So it's like, but if you go to Wikipedia right now, let's say, it will say, oh, acupuncture is a pseudoscience. It's like, well, not necessarily, because we are only finding out that science is only opening up its minds to what could be possibly truths from ancient cultures. And all of that to say that I think we shouldn't lose knowledge. We shouldn't lose wisdom. It came from our side of the world and our cultures, just because it may not have gone through the whole process of enlightenment and the scientific revolution, because there was still depth and understanding and knowledge that we can benefit from today. And we have been. If you look at yoga, if you look at, I mentioned NSDR, acupuncture, if you go to military things like, Confucius, these are always referenced and we have been learning from those things. So if you learn from one, what's to say that the other one isn't just as true or just as deep? Why would you discount Ayurvedic practices when you do not discount yoga? Like it doesn't logically make sense. So that's the position of a contrarian, is to say, you've made these assumptions, but maybe there's knowledge you're missing out. And I think that's very important, because in this age of AI and all of these things, what's really valuable is original thought, because an original thought has not been scraped by an AI or Stability AI today. So for an open, new form of art has not been scraped by one of these AI algorithms. And only a human today can create that. And there's the other ancient knowledge I often derive from is Sufi poetry. There's this poet, Savastri, he talks about it is the position of God to go from thought to action. And there is only one being on earth that can do that today, which is you can have a thought and you can act on that thought, and that thought can be original. And that's only humans. We can do that. So it's just a very special position that we are in. And I take a lot of kind of pride in that, that we are able to do that, despite all of the horrible things that we still are also able to do.
I'm going to switch gears to the last bit of our podcast, and we're going to get a little more just ground level in terms of practicalities. You've gone through this amazing experience where this company and this technology that you built with called BRIO, this company that was eventually Adobe last year, but the head of technology at BRIO. Tell us a little bit about what BRIO was and just really quickly what that acquisition experience was like as an entrepreneur, but also as an individual in terms of the ambition you were talking about earlier. And then
Yeah.
let's move into what you're building now.
Yeah, for sure. So the reason I joined BRIO is because in 2018-ish time, decided to leave FinTech because that's where I was doing most of my work. Considering Toronto, that's like the mainstay of technology work that people do. Because I went to conference called about innovation, FinTech innovation, and someone said, "Oh, the greatest thing we did is like e-transfer, money transfer thing." I was like, "What?" And at that moment, I realized that I was not fulfilling my potential. And I think I decided really by the time I was leaving that I'm going to leave the industry. So I was looking for something new, and the universe conspires to make that happen. Through a friend, I got connected to BRIO. And as I went to meet them, just the people who were building the company. So Dave, Kenny, the CFO of company, the parent company called Spin, they were just like amazing, inspiring people that I saw myself in. People of color, people of style together, and they represent so well. It's just, I just saw myself in them. And I was very grateful that I got the opportunity to work with them. And I forced myself to level up further than what I was doing before and work harder, work more with the balance, with a newfound balance, because I was also dating my wife at the time, that built something amazing. And by the time of the acquisition, almost two and a half years later, we had 40,000 users on the platform, a terabyte of data, fresh data every month being transferred from the platform. And what the product was is a web-based 3D presentation tool. So you'd create a 3D product that you're selling, post it on your site, have people experience it in augmented reality. And we did this is what I meant about the visionary aspect of what Dave does. We did this before anyone else in the industry to be able to do it at scale like that. And I think that's what Adobe found valuable. And that's what we're bringing to the table today in what we do at 3D and Immersive at Adobe. So currently what I'm building is about empowering creators and how do we make 3D more accessible to people? How do we make some of these technologies that we see at Adobe Research and the amazing work that some of our coworkers do? How do we bring that to the user, do that at scale, use cutting edge technology to do so? So I'm really privileged in many ways to be working on these things and feel really proud about that. But I guess what also I'm thinking about is like, how does technology help the diaspora of Bengali people and like other people too? That's something that I've been like scratching at is like there needs to be some way to solve that problem too. Like, I think there's this lack of connection in our diasporas. How do you solve that problem? So those are kind of I'm thinking about, but day to day, I'm getting to work with some of the best 3D artists in the world and 3D builders in the world, product builders in the world. So it's a very privileged position to be in. And I'm just constantly trying to level up and build products them and my team, like helping them grow and working with them really closely to build something cool and build the next thing that I think we could be proud of.
That's amazing. To build something and then 2.5 years later to be bought out by one of the best known technology brands in the world, Adobe. Like, who hasn't used PDF readers and Photoshop? It's crazy to me.
A
And it's amazing.
testament really to it's a testament to what I'm like I mentioned earlier, what I'm trying to learn from Dave, the maker. He approaches building products. This is the second business he sold to an A-listed company, like previous company he sold to Autodesk. So that's what I'm really trying to learn. But it's also a testament to what Adobe values. Like they see us doing the work and they see someone like Dave leading that. I think they also value great work, great thinking, dedication to user, and been the history of Adobe as well. Like everything from Photoshop to PDF to all the products and substance. It's in the service of creators, right? It's in the service of helping people do their work. And I think that's what we really excel at. And that's what we said about technology. I think that's why Adobe is such a great technology company that's been around for 40 years. It's no
Oh,
mean feat to be able to do that, right?
cool.
Most companies don't survive. So to be able to do this in and out for 40 years. And if you think about a lot of the technology that's seminal to our world was built by Adobe. So
Oh,
images, Photoshop, Flash,
After Effects,
the
all the
After
stuff.
Effects. Yeah, all of these things, they're all built by Adobe and privileged for me to be able to be here and do the work we do. Yeah.
Amazing. Last question. So I want to bring it all together, condense it. You mentioned contrarian thinking, but I think contrarians also serve a purpose in the sense that they promote convergent thinking as well. Like, how do you draw from all these other places and have an original thought or an original synthesis of something? So bringing it all together, Cole as a Bengali, as an immigrant, as a successful technology entrepreneur, a founder, a husband, a friend, a psychonaut. What role does technology play in the fragmented world that we live in today? And you didn't touch on this enough. Going back to what you're building and the problem we're solving, went to diaspora of people around the world. What role does technology play in this? Bringing all your experiences and philosophies together.
Yeah, I think it really has to enable and scale the problem that everyone faces, right? I think, as you know, there's a epidemic of loneliness in the world. Diasporas are not able to connect to the different parts of the world that people live in. And I think technology just need to, even though I love technology and I do it, but do not, I'm not obsessed by it. I'm not taken away by its allure. There's this book, one of my favorite books called Flowers for Algernon. And not to spoil it for everyone, but the bottom line in that book is that you cannot fall in love with your own intelligence. And I mean that as a collective, you cannot fall in love with technology that you cannot see past it. And that's why, I've often had the contrarian position of when I see a hype cycle to be like, maybe it is not a hype cycle. Maybe it is not the next biggest thing. Because if it was, a lot of the basic problems would be solved. And today they are not solved yet. So energy is not solved today. So yes, AI can be the next big thing, but if it hasn't solved energy, for example, to me, it's not the next biggest thing. Right. So I see it that way. And I think technology should be used to solve these big problems, connecting the world of atoms and the bits together. And that's how I try to position those problems I'm solving always from what we do at Adobe to the problems we solved before and what I'm hoping to solve in the future is that how do you connect the dots and how do you do it at scale? Because that's what technology can do for you. Is you do it at scale, you can connect billions of people at once and really empower them, not in the way where the old guard of technology where you're extracting from people, meaning advertising, data, et cetera, but really help people make connection like we did on Twitter or make next right decision or find the next right thing to do. So I think those are the things that technology needs to be able to enable. And those are the things I'm hoping to build. But once again, I'm not distracted by the allure of it, where it is not the be all end all that should be there. What is be all end all is what I said earlier about humans. Like we are actually the creators of this technology. We're not beholden to them and we shouldn't be. And I don't think we will be because we have a knack for getting around those issues no matter what happens. Yeah, I really think it's about empowering the human and doing it at scale. That's what I think technology can do for us.
So well said. And it's also, to me, it's about using technology to remember and go back to the basics, which is it's about connection. It is about history and culture. It's about belonging and things like that. And in the way that technology can enable that, of course, you have to solve the first order problems, energy and food and shelter. An optimist, I share the optimism with you in that sense. I think we can, but we cannot be obsessed with our own creation in your own words. So fantastically said. Kowsheek, this was a pleasure. I feel like, as we always do in our casual chats, keep talking for hours, but it's fantastic to have you. Thanks a lot for sharing your experience and your wisdom.
Thank you, because I think the work you're doing here and also like just the relationship I have with you has been one of the greatest things I've come across in a long time because it's given me a sense of belonging that I didn't think I would be able to have, and I didn't know I had it. I had missed it till I had it, which was awesome. And you continue to do the same for, I'm sure, a lot of people, which is amazing. So thank you.
Appreciate you saying that, brother. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This podcast was produced in collaboration with Carolyn Tripp on art design. Thanks for listening to Minority Trip Report. I'm your host, Rod Siraj.